Welcome to Live Daf, your online Daf Yomi Shiur.
Shalom and welcome back to today's Daf Yomi, Shabbos Daf Tesayin, or Tezvav Amud Beis, the last line. It says the Gemara, Ela Me'ata. Now the Gemara taught us that the Chachamim imposed the halachos of Tumah v'Tahara on Kleis Chuchis, on glassware. Although in the Torah we don't find any mention of glassware incurring Tumah v'Tahara. Nevertheless, the Chachamim made a gzeira that the halachos should apply to glassware as well. This was one of the 18 gzeiros shegazru b'yayim that were enacted by the Talmidim of Shammai and Hillel. And why indeed did the Chachamim apply the halachos of Tumah v'Tahara to glassware as well? The Gemara gave us the reason. Since the beginning of its formation is from sand, it comes from sand, therefore it is close in nature to kli cheres, to earthenware, and therefore the Chachamim applied the same halachos of Tumah v'Tahara that kli cheres have. They applied that to kli chuchis as well. The Gemara told us that what follows this svara, since kli chuchis are put into the same category as kli cheres, that the halachos of klei cheres will apply to klei chuchis as well. For instance, just as klei cheres cannot be immersed in a mikveh, if a klei cheres becomes tummy, the only way to be matayirit is by breaking it, by rendering it unfit for use. Similarly, klei chuchis are in the same category. You can't be toivel, you can't immerse a klei chuchis in a mikveh. If it becomes tummy, you need to break it, shvirasan metarasan, you need to perforate it, make it unfit for use, and nullify its keli status, its vessel status, and by doing so, it becomes tar. Says the Gemara, Ela Me'ata, if so, that Kleis Chuchis will put into the same category as Klei Cheres with regards to the halachas of Tumah. If so, why don't we apply the other halacha of Klei Cheres to Kleis Chuchis as well? For instance, Ela Me'ata Lo Tamu Migavan. It shouldn't become tummy from the outside, just as a Klei Cheres cannot be mekabel tumah, cannot contract tumah from the outside of the kli. It can only be mekabel tumah from the inside, from the interior of the kli. We learn from the pasuk that the only way a kli cheres will become tummy if the tumah, for instance, the sheretz, the dead mouse or lizard, falls into the interior of the kli cheres. But if it merely touches the flat surface on the outside of the kli cheres, migabon, it doesn't become tummy. Says the Gemara, why don't we apply the same principle, the same concept to the Kleis Chuchis as well? Since Kleis Chuchis are put into the same category as Klei Cheres. And we know that's not so. The Kleis Chuchis does not have this stipulation, does not have this exemption. It could even be Mekabel Tumah from the outside. Again, Elamiyata, Lilatamu Migaban, Allah Tanan. If so, why did we learn in the Mishnah that teaches us otherwise? That Kleis Chuchis indeed can be Mekabel Tumah, Migaban. Says the Mishnah. Klei Cheres or Klei Neser, earthenware, and the Klei Neser, which is some similar type of earthenware. As she says, it's from a light-colored earth, min adama levana, some white earth. So the Mishnah tells us that these two things, tumas and shava, they are on equal status, on equal footing regarding hilchas tum. For instance, mitamin, they can both be makabel tumah, they can receive tumah, umetamin, and they can transfer tumah to something else, me avirein, via their airspace. They don't even need to come into contact with the item in order for them to become tamei or to transfer tumah to something else. For instance, if a sheretz is lowered into their airspace, that already transfers tumah to the kli itself. The airspace is a conduit to transfer tumah both ways. If something tar comes into the avir of a klei cheres, to the interior airspace of a klei cheres, which is tamei, so the klei cheres, which is tamei, transfers its tumah via its airspace to this item that is lowered into its airspace. So once again, mitamin, it can be mekabel, can receive tumah, umitamin, it can transfer tumah to something else through via this conduit of mei avirein, its interior airspace, the avir of its teich. What else? Umitamin, it can receive a tumah, it can accept tumah, mei achirein, from behind. What this means is, let's say on the backside of the kli there's some hollowed out area, an area which can technically receive something. For instance, the base of a goblet. So there is some sort of toich there. There's a hollow area which is fit to receive. It's not a flat outer surface. That is me'achirein. So these kelim, klei cheres, klei neser, can be makabel tuma. Me'achirein, if a tuma touches that outer area, it is metame de klei cheres. However, ve'ein metamen migabein, but it can't be makabel tuma simply from its gav, from its flat outer surface. One more thing, says the Mishnah, ushvirasan metarasan. The only way to be metar, to purify a klei cheres or klei neser, is through shvira, through breaking it, through rendering it unfit as a kli, as a vessel. It loses its status of kli, and that's how it becomes tar. So once again, the Mishnah tells us there are four concepts which apply to both klei cheres and klei neser. The concept of avir, that the airspace, the interior airspace, the avir of the toich, is a conduit to transfer tumah from the klei cheres to another item, and the same in reverse. It is a conduit, is a medium for the klei cheres to receive tumah from something which is tamei that was lowered into its airspace. The Mishnah tells us it is mikabel tumah me'achirein. If there's an outer area which is a hollowed out area, like the base of a goblet, which has some sort of toich there. If you flip over the goblet, you can actually put something into this achiraim. So if something touches that achiraim, it is metame de kli, but not through migabon, not merely the flat outer surface of the kli. That is called the gav, the back of the kli, and you cannot transfer tumah into the kli via the gav. Finally, there's no immersion in the mikveh for klei cheres and klei neser. If it becomes tamei, you need to break it. Says the Gemara, we can infer from here, we have a diuk, klei neser or klei cheres, who did tumas on Shaveh. Only cheres and neser have these halachas. Only they have this exemption of that they're not mikabel tumah, migabein, from their back. Apparently, avol midei achrin aloi. Apparently, other types of kelim, for instance, like a klei zchuchis, a glassware, indeed can be mikabel tumah from the flat outer surface. How does that work? If we're going and saying that klei zchuchis are put into the same exact category klei cheres, klei cheres is the root, is the source, the deviation for the tumah of klei zchuchis. So why don't we put klei zchuchis entirely into the category of klei cheres and let it have all the halachas of klei cheres? And why do we find this discrepancy that klei cheres is not mikabel tumah from the flat outer surface, from the gav, and regarding klei zchuchis, apparently it is mikabel tumah migabe? Says the Gemara, Amri. So they said as follows: indeed, klei zchuchis is close in nature to klei cheres. It is created, is formed from the sand. Therefore, it has the same halachas as klei cheres. It's mikabel tumah. It cannot be put into a mikveh. However, says the Gemara, let's keep in mind that klei zchuchis is also close in nature to other types of kelim. How is that? Amri, says the Gemara, they answer as follows: Kiva dechinishtabru yeshlam takana. Since we find something unique by klei zchuchis, unlike klei cheres. For instance, if the klei zchuchis breaks, we can take the shards of glass and crush it, remelt it, and reform it, recreate with it a new kli. We can recycle it. And that way it is very different than klei cheres, which once it breaks, it's unfit for use. It's goodbye. So, since we find that klei zchuchis is close in nature to other kelim, for instance, it's like a kli matchis, it's like a metalware. Why? Because it can be recycled. The material, the chomer of the klei zchuchis, can be reformed afterwards and recreated into a new kli. If so, says the Gemara, since it has some similarities to klei matchis, which also has that type of nature, a metalware, a kli made of metal, you can go ahead and reform it, reshape it. Therefore, shavinu kekli matchis. Therefore, the Chachamim, they compared it. They applied some halachas of kli matchis as well. So it's interesting that klei zchuchis carries both elements. It contains similarities to both types of kelim. It's close in nature to klei cheres, and therefore it has some halachas of klei cheres. Number one, it can become tamei. Number two, you can't immerse it in the mikveh. At the same token, says the Gemara, it also is close in nature to klei matchis, because unlike klei cheres, which once it breaks, it's gone. It's not It's not. We can't recycle it any longer. However, Kli Zchuchis, once it breaks, we can go ahead and reshape it, remelt it, reform it. So in that sense, it is close in nature to Kli Matchis, to metalware, and therefore the Chacham applied some halachis of Kli Matchis to the Kli Zchuchis as well. So it's some sort of joint halacha. Kli Zchuchis contains elements and halachas of both types of kelim. Now, it's interesting, the Achronim, the Kedusharim, and others point out that we find many differences, many discrepancies between the halachas of Kli Cheres, earthenware, and other kelim. For instance, the halacha of Avir, that the airspace of a Kli Cheres is a conduit, is a medium to transfer tumah to and from the Kli. This is something we don't find regarding other types of kelim. The Gemara told us that the halacha of Gav, of the flat outer surface, by Kli Cheres is different than other kelim. A Kli Cheres is not makabel tumah from its outside, from its flat outer area. However, other kelim can be makabel tumah from the Gav. So the Mepharshim point out that perhaps this is based on a fundamental difference in nature, in perception, between Kli Cheres and other kelim. Kli Cheres is very different in the sense that the actual material of the Kli Cheres, of the earthen kelim, the actual chomer, the earth that we form the kelim with, is very ordinary, it's very low in value. The value, the chashivah, significance of the Kli Cheres is primarily based and connected to its function, to its use, to its interior, to the fact that it's able to receive, to be makabel, and to serve us in that way. It's not the chomer, it's not the material that has value, but rather it's the shimush, it's the use. And therefore we understand that the primary focus by Kli Cheres is on the toich, on the interior, not only on the interior surface, but even on the interior airspace. It's considered to be part of the interior. It's included in the inside of the Kli, where that is the place of shimush, that is the place of use, of function of the Kli. And therefore, the toich and the avir of the toich indeed is considered to be the focal point of the Kli, and the tumah gets transferred to and from the avir. However, the gav, the outer surface of a Kli, the outside of the Kli, that serves no real purpose. It's not the mokum shimush of the Kli. It's not where the Kli serves us. And since once again the value of the Kli is because of its service, because of its shimush, because it's providing use and receiving items. In that sense, we say that the pnim, the toich, is the primary area of the Kli, and not the gav, not the outer area, the outside of the Kli. However, regarding other types of kelim like Kli Matchis, in those kelim, it's not only the function that's important, it has value based on the actual material itself. The metal itself, the gold, the silver, carries value. So regarding those kelim, it's not just the toich, not just the interior, the ability to receive and to serve, that gives the Kli its chashivas, its value. The Kli has value based on its actual material, based on its chomer. So its identity is related to its chomer, to its material as well. Therefore we understand that a Kli Matchis is makabel tumah only when there is actual contact with its chomer, with its material, with its surface. And at the same time, it is also makabel tumah from the outside. Because once you touch the chomer, once you touch the material, you've come into contact with the integral part of the vessel of the Kli. At the same time, the avir, the airspace, carries no special significance. It's the surface. It's actually coming into contact with the surface material of the Kli that has the ability to connect you with the Kli. So this is the fundamental difference between Kli Cheres, earthen kelim, where its only value is based on the function, on the shimush, on the use, and that is very much connected and related to the toich and the airspace of the interior. And other kelim, where the value is based on the actual material, we identify it through its material, through its chomer, and therefore needs to be direct contact with the material, regardless of whether it's the inside or the outside. Getting back to klei zchuchas, if so, it appears that klei zchuchas, glassware, carries both elements, is close in nature, and related to both of these concepts. It's a combination. It's a combined concept. On the one hand, it's formed from sand. In that sense, it has similarities to klei cheres, to earthen kalim. It is tamei like a klei cheres. It can't have tvila like a klei cheres. At the same time, the Gemara tells us that regarding the tumah zagav, it can be mekabel tumah from the outside. Why? Since if a klei zchuchas breaks apart, kiven dechinish tabru, yeshlam takana, we can go ahead and repair it again. We can remelt it, recycle it, reform it, reshape it. So we see here that the chomer as well, the material of the kli, has value, has chashivas, unlike a kli cheres. So in this sense, it is close in nature to kli matches. Since the actual material has chashivas, so we relate it in that sense to other kalim, where we find a similar concept that even if it breaks apart, even if the use is no longer, the actual vessel is rendered no longer fit for use. However, the material, the gold, the silver, the metal, outlasts the actual kli, the actual utensil. You can go reform it, reshape it again. So it's the material of the kli that has the value, that has the significance, that has the identity here. And therefore, the klei zchuchas as well is connected to that, connected to this halacha, and it has this element as well. And therefore, when the klei zchuchas becomes tamei, migabay, and indeed is mekabel tumah, migabay, as long as the tumah touches its surface, even if it's on the outside, which is not the ikr mokim of its tashmish, not the ikr place where it functions mainly on the inside. Nevertheless, since you come into contact with the chomer, with the actual material of the klei zchuchas, is mekabel tumah, because the klei zchuchas, the chomer, the material of the klei zchuchas, has significance, has chashivas, has value. Okay, says the Gemara, so the conclusion is that klei zchuchas carries elements of both. On the one hand, it has halachas of klei cheres. On the other hand, the Chachamim also imposed halachas of klei matches, because klei zchuchas is a joint kli, it's a combined entity. Says the Gemara, ela me'ata. If so, why don't we apply other halachas to klei zchuchas as well? Other halachas of klei matches should be imposed on klei zchuchas. Ela me'ata yachzru l'tumas yeshana. For instance, there's a halacha that a klei matches, a kli of metal, if it becomes tamei and then you go ahead and you matar it, the Gemara later will explain the details of this halacha, it can revert back to its earlier tumah. Says the Gemara, this unique halacha that kli matches contain should be applied to klei zchuchas as well. Says Gemara, ela me'ata, if we apply the halachas of klei matches to glassware, if so, why don't we apply the following halacha as well? Yachzru l'tumas yeshana klei matches. Where do we find this halacha? It's not klei matches, metalware, pshuteyan umekableyan toirin. Regardless of whether it's a flat kli without a toich, without an interior, or umekableyan, or if the klei matches indeed has an interior, a toich to receive. Either way, tamein, they are tamei. There's no stipulation, no condition that a klei matches needs to have a toich and interior in order to be mekabel tumah. Nishvru taru. If the klei matches breaks, it becomes tar. Chazar v'asamem kalim. If he takes his broken vessel and reforms it, repairs it, and makes it fit for use again, chazru l'tumasa an yeshana. It reverts back to its old tumah. So this is halacha unique to klei matches, to metalware. However, v'ilu gabel klei zchuchas tanan, regarding glassware, we find otherwise. It doesn't have this halacha. The Mishnah tells us, klei eitz, wooden kalim, uklei oyer, leather kalim, uklei etzem, kalim made from bones, uklei zchuchas, in glassware, pshutei and toyer, if they're merely flat without an interior, they're toyer. Rashi explains, since we are makish, we connect, the pasuk connects with a hekesh, the other kalim, to sak, which is a sack, which has an interior, which has a klei kibul, it can contain items within. So apparently the Torah is connecting the two things, and just as a sack has an interior and therefore it is mekabel tumah. It can contract tumah. So to the other kelim, klei eitz, oir, etzem, and the Mishnah puts together klei zchuchas as well, has the stipulation and precondition. In order for them to be mekabel tumah, they need to have a toich, an interior, a place where they can receive something. So pshuteim, they're merely flat, without a toich, they're tar. Umekableim tmeim, if indeed they can be mekabel something, they have an interior, in that case, they are in the category of kelim that can be mekabel tumah. Continues the Mishnah, nishbru, if they break, taru, this indeed is mitar those kelim, chazav asmem kelim, if it goes ahead and reforms these into kelim, mekabel tumah, mekabel haba, going forward indeed, they have a status of a kli, and they can be mekabel tumah. However, mikhanol haba in, but not retroactively. They don't revert back to their former tumah. So we see clearly that even a klei zchuchas doesn't have this halacha. Says Gemara, why? If we just finish saying that klei zchuchas is put somewhat into the same category of kli mateches, so why don't we apply this halacha of kli mateches to klei zchuchas as well? Answers the Gemara, we must keep in mind that tumas klei zchuchas d'Rabbanan. The whole concept of a glassware becoming tummy, it's only a rabbinic concept. It's a gzera d'Rabbanan. V'tumah yeshana d'Rabbanan. And this whole concept that a klei matris reverts back to its old tumah, once repaired, that also is only a tumah d'Rabbanan. The Gemara later will explain the reason for this tumah d'Rabbanan. So this is a double d'Rabbanan. Therefore, says the Gemara, we won't pile up two d'Rabbanans. But tumah d'Oraisa, achisa v'Rabbanan tumah. Only with regard to tumas, which are biblical concepts, which are tumah d'oraisa, do the Rabbanan impose those tumas on klei zchuchas? Since klei zchuchas is in the Rabbanan imposed hilchas tumah, but which ones? Only a halachat of tumah which is min haTorah. However, betumah d'Rabbanan lo yachisu lo Rabbanan tumah, but a tumah which is merely a Rabbanan tumah, like this whole concept of a kli reverting back to its old tumah, once it became tar and it was repaired, this is a rabbinic concept. This is a tumah d'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan did not apply this to klei zchuchas, which at the root is only a tumah d'Rabbanan. The Rabbanan did not pile up two d'Rabbanans, one on top of the other. So this explains why klei zchuchas, although it's similar somewhat to klei matchis and has halachis somewhat of klei matchis, nevertheless, a tumah d'Rabbanan, which klei matchis contain, that was not imposed on klei zchuchas. Says Gemara, okay, you've explained why klei zchuchas does not have this halacha of being chayzer l'tumas yishana because it's merely a tumah d'Rabbanan. What about a tumah d'oraisa, like the halacha of pshutein? We just mentioned that only certain types of kelim, klei eitz, klei oir, klei etzem, have this precondition that they need to have a toich, need to have an interior in order for them to be mekabel tumah. However, the Mishnah told us klei matchis, metalware, doesn't have that condition. Even pshutein, if they're merely flat, their utensil kli don't have an interior toich. They indeed are tamim natir, because they're not found in that pasuk. There's no hekesh from sak to klei matchis, and therefore a klei matchis, even if it's merely flat without an interior, is tamim. Says more that indeed, that certainly is a tumah d'oraisa. Why don't we apply that to klei zchuchas as well? Says more pshuteihen, flat klei zchuchas, glassware that have no interior, mi'ala tamei, that also should become tamei. Why? The pshutei kli matchis d'oraisa nino. This halacha that kli matchis are tamei even when they are pashat with no interior, that certainly is a din d'oraisa. So here we find a tumah d'oraisa that kli matchis have, and nevertheless we don't apply it to klei zchuchas. Why is that the case? Why do we say in the Mishnah that a klei zchuchas, which is a pashat, which doesn't have an interior, it is tar? Why don't we apply this halacha that we find in klei matchis to klei zchuchas as well? Says more, you're right. However, of the Rabbanan hekira, the Chachamim wanted to make a deviation, a heker, something to call attention to the unique status of klei zchuchas, to declare that klei zchuchas is only a tumah d'Rabbanan. That the whole concept that glassware becomes tamei, that's only a gzera d'Rabbanan. but it's not a din Torah. Therefore, the Rabbanim want to make some sort of a deviation. They gave Kli Zchuchis an exemption, and did not apply this halacha of pshutim to Kli Zchuchis. Why did they do so? Why was it so important to make a heker? Says the Gemara, ki hechi, so that the lo lisrif alayu truma v'kachim, so that the public would not erroneously conclude that Kli Zchuchis is tamim min HaTorah. And for instance, if it comes into contact with truma or kachim, you need to burn the truma v'kachim. But it's not the case. In reality, since Kli Zchuchis is only tamim midrabanan, there's no truma min HaTorah in Kli Zchuchis. Since it's only midrabanan, we're not meant to burn truma v'kachim as a result of a truma d'Rabbanan. Rashi points out, we never burn truma as a consequence of a truma d'Rabbanan, except for those 6 sfeikas mentioned in Daf Tezvav. Those are exceptions. Apparently, the Rabbanan held those scenarios on a very high standard, and they applied the halacha of Torah. They considered it to be a definite tumah, like a tumah not Torah, and therefore sreifa indeed does take place as a consequence, as a result of those 6 tumahs. However, generally speaking, with regard to other tumahs midrabanan, we never go ahead and burn truma v'kachim as a result of that tumah. So therefore, the Gemara explains to us that the Chacham wanted to call attention to that discrepancy between other tumahs min HaTorah and the tumahs Kli Zchuchis, the glassware tumah, which is merely a tumah midrabanan, acted as a gzeira from the Yudches Gzeiros. And therefore, the Chacham exempted Kli Zchuchis from this particular halacha. And therefore, they said that a Kli Zchuchis, which is flat, which is pashut, which doesn't have a teichen interior, is indeed tar. Although, theoretically speaking, it would have made sense to say that it was tamei, because since Kli Zchuchis is compared to Kli Matchis, and Kli Matchis is tamei when it's a pashut, so that halacha should apply to Kli Zchuchis as well. However, the Rabbanan exempted Kli Zchuchis from this stringency to call attention to its unique status, to its lenient status, that it's merely a midrabanan. So in summary, Kli Zchuchis have some similarities to Kli Cheres. It is tamei like a Kli Cheres. It cannot be immersed in a mikveh like a Kli Cheres. However, the Gemara added that since Kli Zchuchis is also close in nature, it has some elements similar to a Kli Matchis. If it breaks apart, you can reform it. The glass itself has value, has significance beyond the actual vessel, the use of the vessel. It's the chaymer, it's the material that also has value. Therefore, its identity doesn't just lie in its use, but also in its inherent value of its material. And therefore, in that sense, it's close in nature to Kli Matchis, and we impose some halachas of Kli Matchis as well. For instance, just as a Kli Matchis is mikabel tumah from the outside, migaboy, Kli Zchuchis as well. The Gemara concluded, however, that we only apply to Kli Zchuchis a tumah which is a biblical tumah, a tumah d'oraisa. But for instance, the tumah of yachzor to masan yeshana, to revert back to its old tumah when it breaks apart and it's repaired, that we don't do, because that's merely a tumah d'Rabbanan. The Gemara concluded as well that the halacha of pshutim is not applied here. The Rabbanan wanted to make some sort of exception to show that Kli Zchuchis is merely a tumah d'Rabbanan. Continues the Gemara. Rav Ashi Amar. Rashi is coming to answer this confusion. On the one hand, we say that Kli Zchuchis has tumah because it is formed from sand and is close in nature to Kli Cheres. What follows is that it can't be immersed in a mikveh like Kli Cheres. The Gemara, however, asked a kasha. The Gemara asked a few kashas. Why don't we apply the halacha of Gabay? Why don't we compare it to Kli Cheres? Just like Kli Cheres is not makabel tumah Gabay, Kli Zchuchis as well should not be makabel tumah through the outside of the Kli. The Gemara as well asked, what about the halacha of yachzor to masan yeshana? What about the halacha of pshuteim? Says Rav Ashi, that's not difficult, because in fact Kli Zchuchis is never compared to Kli Matchis. It is connected, it is identified, it is put into the same category as Kli Cheres, strictly Kli Cheres, and therefore certainly it doesn't have any halachas of Kli Matchis. It doesn't have the halacha of reverting back to its old tumah like Kli Matchis. It doesn't have the halacha of pshuteim like Kli Matchis, because once again Kli Zchuchis is strictly in the category of Kli Cheres. If so, we have one remaining kasha. What about the halacha of migaboy? Why don't we say, just like klicheres is not mekabel tumah migaboy, kli schuchas as well should not be mekabel tumah from the outer surface? Here's more insight. Rav Ashi Amar La'olam, in truth, klicheres damu. Kli schuchas is entirely connected and put into the same category as klicheres, and therefore it doesn't have any elements, any halachas of kli matchis. It doesn't have tumah yishana. It doesn't have the halacha of pshutim tmeim. So we addressed all that. We have one remaining kasha. What about your initial question? If they are connected and identified with klicheres, so just like klicheres is not mekabel tumah from the outside, from the gav, klischuchas as well should not be mekabel tumah megavan. Says Rav Ashi, I'll address that question. The answer is as follows: Hoyel v'nire toichay kivarim, because klischuchas, unlike klicheres, glassware is see-through, it's transparent. One takes a look at it from the outside, he sees straight through it. There's no clear differentiation between the interior and the exterior. It looks like all one big thing. There's no hefsek, there's no clear delineation between the inside and the outside. Therefore, says Rashi, lo ychoshev gav elotoich. Therefore, it has no concept of gav. Since you can see right through it, we don't say that this is the outside and that's the inside. It's not clearly marked, and therefore the whole entire kli has one big status. It's not considered like this is gav and that's toich. It's all one halacha, and there is no concept of gav at all by klei schuchas. So once again, according to Rav Ashi, klei schuchas is entirely connected and identifies with klei cheres. However, with regarding to the halacha of gaboy, klei schuchas is different because one sees right through it, and there's no real heker to differentiate between toicha and gaboy. It all looks like one big kli, and therefore it has no halacha of gaboy, and has no exemption of gaboy, and it can be kabel tumah, whether from within or whether from on the outside. So, in summary, the halacha of klei schuchas, the Chachamim applied exera and imposed the halachas of tumah to glassware. Why is that? So we have two approaches in the Gemara. The first approach in the Gemara was that indeed a klei schuchas is a composite between the halachas of klei cheres and klei matchis. It has similarities to both. On the one hand, it is close in nature to klei cheres because it is briyasei min hachoil, it is created from sand, and therefore it is tamei like a klei cheres. It has no tahara b'mikvah like a klei cheres. The Gemara proceeded and told us, at the same time, it is also close in nature to metalware. Why is that? Because just like klei matchis, when it breaks, you can reform it, reshape it. The actual material has value. Similarly, glassware, even after it breaks, you can remelt it and reshape it. So in that sense, it's close to klei matchis, and therefore, it has halachis similar to klei matchis. On the one hand, it's not mitame or mitame, mi'aver. It cannot be received or transferred tumah through its airspace. In this sense, it's close. It's identified with klei matchis. It doesn't have the concept of avir, unlike klei cheres, where the avir serves as a medium for transferring tumah. The Gemara told us it's also mitame migaboy. It also receives tumah from the outside, similar to klei matchis. The Gemara told us that regarding to the halacha of chazru l'tumas and yishana, that halacha of klei matchis is not applied to klei schuchas. Why? Because that's different. That's a tumah d'Rabbanan. And finally, the Gemara told us regarding the halacha of pshuteim tmeim, that even a flat klei matchis is tamei. That also is not applied to klei schuchas. The Rabbanan want to make a heker, a recognition, to make a statement that klei schuchas is different. It's only a tumah d'Rabbanan. Therefore, they applied that exemption. Rav Ashi had a different approach. He says that klei schuchas is entirely identified with klei cheres. Therefore, it is tamei. Therefore, it has no tahar b'mikvah. Therefore, certainly, it is not chayzer to masa yishana. That's a halacha unique to klei matchis. Therefore, also the pshutim, a flat klei schuchas is tar, because we don't compare it to klei matchis in that sense. And finally, what about the tumah megaboy? Although klei cheres is not mitame megaboy, klei schuchas is different because it is nira toichay kivari. because there's no clear distinction between the inside and the outside. It's transparent, it's see-through. Therefore, it has no halacha of gaboy, and it is tamei from the outside as well as from the inside. Continues the Gemara, Shimon ben Shetach, tiking ksuva l'isha. We learned this earlier in the Brisa, that he was masaking ksuva l'isha. As Rashi explained, he certainly wasn't masaking the concept of ksuva, but rather he was masaking a takana that one needs to commit all his assets. One needs to be meshabed all his possessions as guarantors for the payment of the ksuva payment to one's wife. One is not meant to simply designate a certain item or a certain possession for the ksuva. Rather, he's meant to commit all his nechasim for the ksuva sisha. What else did he say? V'goza tuma kli matris. Shimon Shatach enacted a gzera on metalware. Says Gemara kli matris deraiseninu. It has tuma min haTorah. Chsiv achas hazov as hakesef. We learn from a pasuk. Says Gemara, what then did Shimon Shatach do? It must be ela l'tuma yishana. He imposed this concept of a tuma yishana, that if a kli matris becomes tamei, and then one goes ahead and breaks it, perforates it, and repairs it, the kli reverts back to its initial tumah. There was a story regarding this queen Shaltzion, she'asa mishtal levna. So she lived in the time of Shimon Shatach, and she prepared a feast for her son. And what happened? V'nitmu kol Kollel, and all the utensils became tamei, tumas meis, and required sprinkling of the mei paraduma. You need to wait 7 days, and be mazeh on the 3rd day, on the 7th day. There was no time for that. They need to make the suda on that day. So they discovered a shortcut. V'shavrasan, so she broke all the kelim, and by doing so, she rendered them unfit, and they lose their status of kelim, and they're tar. And what she do afterwards? She gave it to a smith, and he went ahead and he soldered it and repaired the kelim. So he formed from them new kelim, and it was just in time for the party. So she had kelim that in the morning would tummy to mismace. Somehow, miraculously, by afternoon, they were all tar. Says the Gemara, you can't do that. They revert back to their old tumah, even though technically speaking, they became tar upon breakage. Nevertheless, they imposed a gzera that the kli should go back and revert to its initial tumah. My time, and why did they do that? In order to maintain, to safeguard the institution of mechatas, of the concept of the paraduma water. They wanted that it shouldn't be forgotten from Klal Yisrael. If everybody would go ahead and break their utensils and repair it, they will avoid using the mechatas, the paraduma. And the whole concept of paraduma will be forgotten from Klal Yisrael. Therefore, they will geyser. They want me not do so in order to maintain, to ensure the endurance of the water of the paraduma. Says this works well according to the Shita that holds loy l'chol tumas amru. This gzera does not apply to all other tumas. Elo tumas meis b'vad amru. It only applies to tumas meis shaper. Now we understand, and the reason for this is because of the concern of the mei para becoming obsolete. Elo l'madam, according to the opinion that says l'chol tumas amru, that this gzera was applied to all types of tumas, not only tumas meis, which requires paraduma, but all the tumas as well, tumas sheretz as well. Michael Emaymar. If so, what is the reason for that? The reason can't be connected and related to paraduma. So why indeed did they make a gzera with regard to other tumas as well, that if a klimatris becomes tummy with a sheretz, and the person breaks it and repairs it, it reverts back to tumas sheretz. That can't be related to the reason of paraduma. So what is the reason for that? We must look for a different reason. Amar Abaye, the reason is gzera shema lo yikvenu b'chtei tarasei. Person will not be fully versed in the halachis, and his gzera is a concern that he'll perforate it not large enough. He'll make the nekev not large enough to render the kli really unfit as a kli. He'll make a small hole, small perforation, and he'll suffice with that. So therefore the chacham made a gzera. One cannot go ahead and merely break the kli out of concern that a person will not do it properly. Once again, Amar Abaye gzera shema lo yikvenu. A person will not perforate the kli b'chtei tarasei large enough to be matar the kli. Therefore the chacham said that one may not do so, and indeed it will revert back to his first tumah. Rav Amar, a different reason. Gzeira Shama Yoimru, that the public will gain the wrong perception. And they'll say, look, this Kli became Tameh this morning. Yisharas touched the Kli. Ordinarily, as a result, you need to be Toivel the Kli. You need to wait for Herav Shemesh, for nightfall. Lo and behold, look at the Kli. Ready in the afternoon. It's being used by the meal. It's tar again. Apparently, there's no requirement of Herav Shemesh. Tvila Bas Yoima. Oilala. Merely being Toivel and using it on that day is sufficient, without waiting for nightfall. And that certainly is not the case. So in order to avoid this confusion and this erroneous perception, the Chum did not allow one to use this method. Again, Rav Amar Gzeira. Why did the Rabbanan impose a Tumah Yishana on the Kli Matris? Gzeira Shama Yomru, perhaps people will say, Tvila Bas Yoima Oilala, that the tefillah of that day, without waiting for nightfall, is sufficient. Says Rav Ma'ibinai. So what is the difference, the practical difference between both approaches, between Abaye Svara and Rav Svara? But now the difference is as follows. The Ratzfina Mirtzif. Suppose he didn't merely make a small hole. He went ahead and actually demolished the Kli. He crushed the Kli entirely and rebuilt it, reformed, reshaped it. So there will be enough community here. According to Abaye, the Gzeira will still apply, because we're still concerned that perhaps the next person or the next time he won't do such a good job, and he'll merely make a small hole, which is not sufficient to nullify the status of the Kli. Therefore, the Chachamim employs a blanket Gzeira that anytime a person breaks the Kli and repairs it, it reverts back to its old tumah. However, Rav's approach, that the problem is the erroneous public perception. People may think that Tvila Bas Yoima Oila, that if you merely take a Kli and you toivel it without waiting for nightfall, that is sufficient. That concern doesn't apply in this case, because everybody will see it's a brand new Kli. They'll see it was newly formed, newly designed. Since it was entirely demolished, entirely crushed up, and reformed anew, it's pretty obvious that is the basis for Tahara. There's no room for the public getting the wrong, erroneous perception. So in summary, we have halacha of Klei Matris that broke and were repaired. They revert back, they go back to their initial tumah, to Tumah Yishana. Why? So the Gemara told us, if we're speaking about Tumas Meis, then we have a simple approach. The Chacham were concerned that Meichatas will become obsolete. People will stop using the Meichatas of the Paraduma. Therefore, the Chacham disallowed this practice. According to the Shita, that this concept applies not only to Tumas Meis, but also to Tumas Sheretz. Why did the Rabbanan enact this Gzeira? We have two reasons. Abaye says, we're concerned that the person will not be learned enough, will not know how to properly break his Kli. Shama lo yikvenu. Rava says, the concern is because of the public, that they shouldn't get their erroneous perception that one may simply be toivel a Kli and use it on that day without Herav Shemesh. People will not realize that he broke and repaired it. They'll think that he toiveled it. And one may use a Kli as a result of Tvila without even waiting for Herav Shemesh. Now, one more question to be resolved here. Why specifically Kli Matris? Why is this Gzeira only applicable to metalware, not other Kalim? So the Rush says, the reason is because it is much easier, more convenient for a person to break and to repair metalware. You break it and then you send it to the smith to solder it and repair it in that way. It's convenient, it's easy. It's different than other Kalim, where certainly it's more difficult to go ahead and to break and repair afterwards. Therefore, Chacham concerned, this is something which people have a tendency to do, and therefore they apply the Gzeira strictly to metalware, to Kli Matris. Says the Gemara, okay, so we have a partial list of the 18 Gzeiros enacted by the Talmidim of Shammai v'Hillel. What is another one of those Gzeiros? V'idach mahi. Says the Gemara, we learned in the Mishnah, this is not hameniach kelim tachas hatzinar. One places utensils, kelim under the pipe, under the eave trough, l'kabel behem mei gsham, to receive, to collect in them rainwater. Echad kelim gedolim, whether we're speaking about large-sized kelim, v'echad kelim ketanim, or even small kelim. The Mishnah will tell us that the water that's collected in these kelim are considered to have been drawn in a kli, have the halacha of mayim shu'uvin, and if they're poured into a mikveh, they can validate the mikveh. So this halacha applies whether the kli is a kli gadol, a large-sized kli. Tosfos points out, even if it's too large to be makabel tumah, nevertheless it's considered to be a kli with regard to the halacha of ma'im shuvim. V'chad kelim ktanim, even if they're very small kelim. Rashi points out, perhaps I would think it's not chashuv, they're very insignificant. Nevertheless, they're considered to have a status of a kli, and the water in them is ma'im shuvim. Continues the Mishnah, even kelim that don't become tamei, afilu klei avonim, even stoneware, klei adama, kelim made from adama, from earth, uklei glalim. Some say this means marble or waste from animals. So these kelim don't have the halachas of tumah. They're not makabel tumah. Nevertheless, with regards to this context, they have a status of a kli, and water within them is considered to be drawn water in a vessel, ma'im shuvim, and indeed says the Mishnah, paisel samikv. Continues the Mishnah, echad hamaniach, whether he intentionally placed the kli under the tzinar to collect rainwater, v'echad hashechech, or even if he forgot it there. The rain that gets collected into this kli is considered to be ma'im shuvim. Divrei Beis Shammai, ube'esilel me'etzar m'sheichayach. Beis say, if he intentionally placed it there, then certainly the water collected is considered to be ma'im shuvim. But if he forgot it there, he inadvertently left it there, in that case, there's no din of ma'im shuvim on the water contained in this kli. Amar Rav Meir, indeed, nimnu, they took count, v'rabu Beis Shammai al Beis Hillel. So this is one of those 18 gzeros. They took count, there was a machlekes, they made a count, and it turns out that the Beis Shammai were more numerous than Beis Hillel, and they followed the Raiv, and enacted a gzera, and this was one of those 18 gzeros, that even if you forgot a kli under the pipe, the water collected has a din of ma'im shuvim, and it's paisel samikv. Continues the Gemara, u'moidim Beis Shammai b'sheichech b'chatzar shu tar. Certainly Beis Shammai agreed that if one merely forgets his kli in the middle of the chatzar, in the middle of the courtyard, not under the tzinar, certainly there was no kavana, there was no intention of the kli collecting rainwater, and therefore the water in there is not ma'im shuvim. Amar Rav Yosi, I don't hold that this is one of the 18 gzeros. Adayin machlekes b'mkoyim medes. They never concluded. They never acted a gzer. There was never a nimnu v'ravu. The machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in this case is still ongoing. It's still ongoing machlekes. This is not one of the 18 gzeros. Okay. The Gemara will explain the rationale of the opinions of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Amar Shashe, the Vei Rav Amri, in the Beis Medrash of Rav, they explain as follows. How do we frame this machlekes of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? Everybody agrees, hakol moedim, all agree, ksheinicham b'shas kisher oven tmeim. He placed the vessel under the tzinar, under the eave trough, when it was overcast and rain was imminent. Certainly, placing a kli in that situation is indicative of his intention of the kli collecting the rainwater within it, and the water is considered to be ma'im shuvim. Everybody agrees. Even Beis Hillel agree. On the one hand, so shas kisher oven is agreed upon all. On the other hand, b'shas pizer oven, if the sky is clear, the clouds have dispersed, it's not overcast, rain is not imminent. In that case, everybody agrees. Beis Shammai also agrees that if he places a kli under the tzinar, in that situation, there's no intention, there's no kavana to the kli collecting rainwater, and therefore, even if it rains later and water is collecting in that kli, it's tar, it's not considered to be ma'im shuvim. So where then is the machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? Machlekes is only in the following scenario. Ela sheinicham b'shas kisher adam. He placed the kli under the tzinar, under the pipe, when it was overcast. Rain was imminent. He intended on the kli collecting the rainwater within it. What happened? V'nispazru. And then the clouds dispersed, and it appeared that it wasn't going to rain anymore. V'chazor v'niskashu. And then later on, it became overcast again, and it began to rain, and water was collected in these kelim. So what is the machlekes? Mar savar, Beis Hillel holds, batla machshavta. His initial intention becomes nullified, even though initially he placed the kli. When it was overcast and rain was imminent, he expected rainwater to be collected in his kli. Nevertheless, afterwards that there was pizer oven, the clouds dispersed, he was masiach das, he diverted his intention. He figured it's probably not going to rain anymore, and therefore it's considered to be a nullification of his initial intention, and therefore even if it starts raining again, is not considered to be a realization and an actualization of an initial intention, and therefore it is not considered to be Mayim She'uvim. This is the Shita of Beis Hillel. U'Marsav Beis Shammai holds, Lo Yibata Machshavtoi. His initial machshav, his intention, when he placed the kli under the tzinar, when it was overcast, that machshava does not become nullified. It doesn't become this battle. Even if the clouds dispersed, we say that his initial machshava is still intact. And when it becomes overcast again, and it begins to rain, and water collects in this kli, we consider this to be as a realization, as an actualization of his initial machshava, to indeed have this kli collect rainwater within it. And therefore, it's considered to be Mayim She'uvim. So once again, we have a machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. If a person puts kelim tachas atzinar, the Gemara concludes that if it was b'shas kishur of him, when the sky was overcast and rain was imminent, all agree that the water collected within these kelim is considered to be Mayim She'uvim. If he placed it there b'shas pizur of him, when rain was not imminent, all agree that the mayim in the kli is not Mayim She'uvim. Machlekes is only when it was overcast, and then it became clear, and then overcast again. There was kishur pizur, and then kishur again. According to Beis Shammai, it's considered to be a realization of his initial machshava, and his Mayim She'uvim. According to Beis Hillel, his machshava was batal, and it is not considered to be Mayim She'uvim in this kli. Concludes the Gemara. So this is one of the 18 gzeros, according to the opinion of Meir. However, according to Rav Yossi, the Omer Machlekes Daim Koyim Medes, that they never concluded, and the Machlekes between Shammai and Hillel in this case of Kelim Tachas Hatzinar is still ongoing. If so, we're missing one of the 18 gzeros. Batzrilu, we're missing one of the 18 gzeros. Says Gemara, we'll find another one to replace it. Amar Nachmar Yitzchak. The other gzera is Af, Benois Kusim, daughters of Kusim, of this sect of Kusim, Nidois Marisasan Bayvim Gazru. Chacham Geyser enacted a tumah on the Benois Kusim. Even if they're very young, they're merely in the cradle. They have a din of Nidois. Why is that? The Kusim were a group of people who converted, and their gerus was questionable, and certainly they did not observe many halachas of the Torah meticulously, including the halacha of Nida, that we learn from the pasuk that even a Isha who is 1 day old can become Tamei B'Nida if she sees Dam. The Kusim did not observe this aspect of Hilchas Nida, and therefore the Chachamim applied a Gzeira. They imposed Tumah on even a small girl of Kusim for concern that she might be a Nida. And since they didn't observe this halacha regarding these small girls, therefore we need to treat them all as Tmeis. So once again, Af B'Nois Kusim, Nidois marry Sasam, that they have a status of Nida, even 1 day old, from the cradle. So this Gzeira was Boy B'Yem Gazru, was enacted on that day, and therefore according to Rav Yossi, this will substitute the Gzeira of Kelim Tachas Hatzinar. Perhaps let's take a quick overview of today's daf, and go back to the halacha, once again, of Kleis Chuchis, that the Chachamim went ahead and made a Gzeira on glassware. The halachas of Tumah v'Tahara apply to Kleis Chuchis, and the Gemara had two approaches for the reason, for the basis, for the makeup of this Gzeira. The first approach in the Gemara was that Kleis Chuchis is a joint breed between Klei Cheres and Klei Matchis. It has elements of both, and it relates somewhat to both concepts. On the one hand, since it's formed min ha'chol, it is similar to Klei Cheres, and therefore it contains Hilchos Tumah, and it has no Tahara b'mikvah. At the same time, since if a Kleis Chuchis breaks apart, you can reform it, you can recycle it. In that sense, it's close to nature, to metalware, and therefore it has halachis of Klei Matchis as well. Just as a Klei Matchis does not transfer or receive Tumah through its airspace, Kleis Chuchis as well, just like Klei Matchis can be Mekabel Tumah from the outer surface, Megaboy, Kleis Chuchis as well. The Gemara concluded, however, regarding the other two halachis that pertain to Klei Matchis, for instance, Chazor to Masan Yishana, that if Klei Matchis breaks apart and is repaired, it reverts back to its old Tumah, that will not be applied to Kleis Chuchis, because that's merely a Tumah d'Rabbanan. The Gemara told us regarding the halacha of Pshutein, Tmein, a Klei Matchis which is flat, contains no interior space, it's not a Klei Kibul. Nevertheless, it's Tamei, that 2 will not be applied to Kli Zchuchis, because the Rabbanan want to make a heker, call attention to the fact that Kli Zchuchis is only a Tumah D'Rabbanan. Rav Ashi's approach was different. He says Kli Zchuchis is entirely connected and related and identified with Kli Cheres. And therefore it's Tamei Kli Cheres, as no Tahara like a Kli Cheres. It certainly doesn't have any of those halachis, like Chayzel Tumah Yishana, which is strictly unique to Kli Matchis. It requires a toich. If it's pshuteim, if it's merely flat, it's tar, because we compare it to Kli Cheres. There's one point that Rav Ashi needed to explain. What about the Tumah of Megaboy? Why, with regard to Tumah's Gav, don't we compare it to Kli Cheres? A Kli Cheres cannot be Mekabel Tumah from the outside, and a Kli Zchuchis could. Says Rav Ashi, the difference is because Kli Zchuchis is near a Teicha Kivari, that we can see straight through it. It is transparent, it is see-through. Therefore, Rav Ashi maintains that it doesn't have the concept of differentiating between the inside and the outside. The whole concept of Gaba is only when it is clearly differentiated. There's a clear distinction between the inside and the outside. The Gemara explained the halach of Tumah Yishana, the Chamed Gzera, that if a Kli Matchis, as the Mepharshim explained, since it's easy to break and repair, so we're concerned that perhaps the whole concept of Paraduma will become obsolete and forgotten. So Chachamim applied a Tumah Yishana, that if one goes and breaks and repairs the Kli Matchis, that became Tamei through a mace, it reverts back to its old Tumah. He didn't gain anything. What about Tumah's Sheretz? Says Abaye, there too we're concerned that he might not break it far enough. Rava says, we're concerned about an erroneous public perception. People will think that a tefillah without Harav Shemesh is sufficient, and therefore the Chachamim declared the Kli Matchis, which was broken and repaired, reverts back to its old Tumah. Finally, the Gemara told us that another one of the Yudchas Gzeris is a person who puts a Kli under the tzina, under the pipe to collect rainwater. So if he put it there when it was overcast, and the clouds dispersed, and then it became overcast again and rained into the Kli, this is one of the 18 Gzeris that we consider the water contained within the Kli as Mayim She'uvim. According to Rav Yosi, no, the Machlekes is still ongoing. It never concluded in a Gzera. However, according to Rav Yosi, we must substitute this Gzera with the Gzera of B'nois Kusim, that the Chacham applied a Tumah to B'nois Kusim, even young, even 1 day old, even Mary Susan, even when they're in their cradle, for concern that they might already be Tamei Nida.